Hey friend, welcome to the Mamahood After Trauma podcast. I'm your host, Emily Cleghorn. This podcast is for mamas navigating childhood trauma while also walking through mamahood. Together, we will empower each other to connect with who we were created to be versus who we were told to be in our trauma. I'm so excited that you've decided to take some time out of your day to join me and tune in. I hope you find this podcast uplifting and empowering. Let's get to it. Hello, my friends. Welcome to this episode of the Mamahood After Trauma podcast. I am so excited that you have taken some time out of your day to tune in and listen in on this conversation. Today, I am being joined by Wendy Olson. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we get to have this conversation. So let's dive right in. Let's not waste any time. I'm going to get you to introduce yourself, share with us a little bit about your story and how you came to be working in the trauma recovery space.
Yeah, so my name is Wendy J. Olson. I'm a healing coach, and I'm also founder and executive director of my nonprofit, Grit Plus Gumption. We work with women survivors of sexual exploitation, domestic violence. Through my own healing coaching practice, I walk with women through their stories of past hurts and traumas, help guide them to find their own freedom and healing. So gosh, how did I get to be here? So I think in order to know me and my story, I have to go back to the beginning. Also, I'm incapable of telling a short story. So here we are. So I was born to a single mother, and I grew up in a house with two other parents, namely my grandparents. For the first half of my childhood, I lived with my grandparents, being raised by them, and then the rest of my family. But the latter half, I was raised solely by my mom. When that shift happened in my life, all the things that had been hidden from me about my mother came to light. And I saw where I had to become the parent, as a child so often does, to a parent that doesn't have the capacity to love and care for you, let alone themselves. So there was a lot of emotional neglect and abandonment early on in my life, aside from also growing up without ever knowing my dad. I grew up also in the height of the purity movement of the Southern Baptist Convention here in the States in the 90s, and fell prey to the spiritual abuse there that we endured during that time. And when I was 18, I was raped, and then stayed inside that abusive relationship for about a year and a half. I was raped again at the age of almost 20. And after that second rape, I would say that's where all the hope had officially been snuffed out. I turned to using sex as a weapon, using drugs and alcohol to numb my pain. And, while I was able to get sober in late 2001, I found myself in another abusive relationship in 2002. And with that person, I ended up marrying him and having a child with him. So endured that abusive relationship for 6 years. I left that marriage after he tried to take my life in September 2008, and then just turned back to my numbing ways, still not having any coping mechanisms, any tools or anything. Just, hey, you know what works? Drugs and alcohol. That works really good. It does. I just don't recommend it. In 2009, I met my now husband. We've been together for over 14 years. But if I had a name, when I started to actually deal with all of that trauma, I'd have to say it wasn't until after the birth of my second child, my daughter, when I was 32 years old. So I was having a lot of mental breakdowns, and they seemed to be coming less frequently, but even having a mental breakdown once a month is not healthy, as I was learning. And because of the tenuous relationship I had with my own mother, I was like, I need to do better for her. And so I, got into counseling. I was still doing the whole church thing and trying to find some peace there. Then I started having health issues. I I found out 6 years ago I had fibromyalgia. So while like my faith continued to be strong, and like I knew I needed something else to actually heal the trauma of my past, that, you know, I was just so good at masking with a ton of other things. So yeah, you know, if I'm not dealing with my trauma, I'm absolutely using something else to deal. Right. And while that might not be drugs and alcohol now, there are plenty of other things that we use to cope that in excess can be extremely harmful. How I got into my coaching practice was putting into practice the things that worked for me. In late 2018, a friend of mine introduced me to a book called To Be Told by Dan Allender. And I read it within 24 hours and decided this is obviously what's going to help me. And it did. It really completely changed my life. In that I learned that in naming the harm that happens to you, that's when you're able to find healing for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I like with my clients, I always tell them you cannot change what you are not willing to acknowledge.
Saying the exact same thing in different words. Exactly.
Yeah. You can't change what you don't acknowledge. So like if you believe that you are awful, until you acknowledge that belief, you can't change it. You're just gonna live it out.
I had a friend the other day. She posted this on Facebook. She was in her backyard and like, you know, doing these things that she loves to do, but she accidentally dropped something and like it was her worm compost and it went all over her. And instead of like yelling, you know, the F word really loud or, you know, whatever, she just was like, I love my life. I love my life. I love my life. Just to kind of change like her mindset right away of like, this is not a, you know, FML moment. This is not a, I'm having the worst day. I'm just going to believe that my life is beautiful and this is just an accident. And I was like, that sounds useful. I'm going to try that from now on.
So let's dive into how you flip the script, because as you said, having a mental breakdown once a month is not healthy. So what are some of the steps that you took at the beginning to begin to turn your life to where you are now?
You know, I think you put it in perfect words is, you know, you can't heal what you cannot name. So realizing that the way that I'm feeling right now, having these like, I don't even think I had the name triggers, you know, until many years later, but just being able to say, this is what's happening. I'm not insane, although that's how you truly feel in the moment. I'm not that. I'm being triggered, but why? Why am I being triggered? Okay. Why, when the baby screams, am I like losing my mind? Why are my son's meltdowns, you know, making me want to like climb the walls? I didn't have the name triggers then, but I knew that there had to be something else. Yeah. And so I really went in search of like, obviously something's wrong with me. So tell me what's wrong with me and if I can take a pill for it. When that didn't work, I, you know, turned to spiritualizing everything. And, you know, I think this is a journey a lot of people find themselves on, like, oh, this is, you know, and then you start to gain more tools and meet more people down the road. And as long as you're open and curious to things, like stuff will come your way. And I feel like that was me. So I did try counseling for a while. I've been in and out of counseling my entire life.
Me too.
So fun. I'm a counselor's dream. No. So yeah, just trying counseling, trying other things, reading books. I like read so many books on like how to be a better person, you know, how to be a better parent, how to be a better wife, how to be a better blah, blah, blah. And I just go back to this thing. My friend tells me all this time, we are not broken. You know, I can say there have been points in my life where I'm like, I was broken then, but like, why am I still trying to fix myself? I'm a whole person. Now, there are bits and pieces of me laying scattered across the trauma war field, like everywhere, but I'm still a whole person. I can take those pieces back myself and then I just become more whole.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So all the tools that I grabbed for were like, not helpful, not until I found something that was more concrete, more something that spoke to me specifically. For years I tried to manage my health, which I thought would help my mental health, which it did, but again, just little drops of water in this like big bucket of big jug of, whatever's in there. But just little drops and little drops and little drops. And then when I discovered story work, which is the modality I use for both my coaching practice and nonprofit, I was like, I'm a writer. I love words. This is great. And the whole premise of that was you need to know your story well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here I am, I was like 38 years old at the time. And I was like, well, I know my story. That's like, I know what that is. But it wasn't until I started naming the things and writing the things down,
Mm-hmm.
and even taking just one memory at a time instead of trying to do the whole timeline of your trauma, I was like, oh, you're very surprised at what comes out when you're writing it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can sit here and tell you my story in like 5 or 10 minutes, but you don't fully grasp the entirety of that
Mm-hmm.
until you read like one event in 1,000 words. And
Yeah.
people will, you'll tell on yourself right away, but other people will hear things in your story and be able to name for you that what you thought was normal was harmful.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that both terrifying and also freeing.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that was probably the one that, like, this jug that I'm trying to fill up, like one drop at a time, that was like the gallon that just kept coming and coming, like, and
Mm-hmm.
filling up my water jug or whatever you want to eat. So yeah, I would say that.
Yeah, I love that. I personally have found that writing is so much easier and safer for me to get emotions, thoughts, get trauma out of my body. And I find that when I'm writing, things come out that I would never in a million years say.
Right.
And so I encourage my clients and my followers on social media that if they are able to begin journaling, if it's unsafe for them to use their voice, journaling is an excellent way. Writing down your story, getting your thoughts out is an excellent way to get it out. And there are lots of ways that you can make journaling safer so that you're not worrying about somebody reading it and
seeing all your deep dark secrets that
seeing all your deep dark secrets and being exposed.
Exactly. Writing should be your safe place.
Yeah.
Right. And for some people, it hasn't been. Like if you had a parent that read your diary, and outed you and shamed you for things, that's a trauma in and of itself. But I think of how for a lot of people, you talked about when it's not safe to use your voice, like how, that's a pretty common thread, I think, on all gender spectrums of there was a time in your life where you didn't feel safe using your voice. And namely, it probably happened at home, but it could have happened at school or somewhere else where someone shut you down and was like, no, you need to be quiet. And so being able to write things, pen to paper, typing, anything that slows you down to be able to put words into things and then, put more descriptive words into things and using all of your senses and, saying the thing on paper that you don't have the courage to say out loud. I think that is a sacred space.
It is.
And I think it's one that we can carve out for ourselves. I feel like that's something, and journaling isn't always easy for everybody. but
No.
having some sort of outlet, like you said, getting it out of your body, out of your
Mm-hmm.
head, really. Because, if you got something ping-ponging around in your head, that thing's just going to bounce around everywhere and just, until it.
Or end up taking you down a spiral. That's no good.
Yes. Yes. We've all been there.
Yeah. Oh, have we? So, what are some tips that you could give our listeners about starting to write their story?
I mean, if you're like, how am I going to start my story? The very first thing I would do is recommend a book,
Mm-hmm.
because that's where I started. And I love this person. I respect this person's work. I think he's an amazing gift to just the community in general. But his name's Dan Allender, and he's one of the founders of the Allender Center in Seattle, Washington. And his book was called To Be Told. And it's an easy read in that it's short, but you're going to digest it for a while. So starting there, because the way that he shares his story with such vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
as a man who is now in his 70s, was to me mind-blowing. Like, who does that? Who
Mm-hmm.
talks like that? I've heard him speak. I went to the Allender Center and he taught there and everything, but just the vulnerability which this person shares is contagious. It's like, wow, hundreds of thousands of people have read this book and have heard his stories and know his, I know his business or whatever. If he can do that so publicly and so freely, what the hell is holding me back?
Mm.
And part of, I always like to say, your story is not always for public consumption.
Mm.
It doesn't need to be. If you want to travel down that road at a later time, go for it. Okay. But when you're still healing from something, when you're still processing something, don't bleed all over your audience.
No.
Keep that for you. That is sacred. That is beautiful. That is just for you. And sometimes you're just taking out a piece of paper or hiding a journal, under your mattress, like whatever, that has all of your darkest, most inner thoughts, like people that you wish were dead, like whatever it is, like you're just writing. And it's just this little space that you can carve out that's just for you. Like, my child screamed for 30 minutes straight, and I thought I would throw them out the window today. You're not ever going to say that, in public to anybody else, but can you write that in your journal and get it out? Because if you're keeping it inside, it's ping-ponging all around in your head and telling you you're a horrible person and you should have never been a mother and you should have never had kids and all the other things that take us down. But once you say it,
it's gone.
In your little space, yeah,
it's gone.
And don't think you're the only person that's had that thought before.
Oh,
you're not.
Yeah, you're totally not.
Yeah.
Every mother in the history of history has had that thought at some point or another.
And if not, then this is the wrong podcast for you. You should move on. I once reposted like this meme that was like that's when my toddler turned around and walked away, I flicked her off, because she was such a jerk that day. And some woman on my Facebook was like, that's terrible. I would never do that to my kids. And I was like, cool, you're a better person than me. Like, whatever. Don't mom shame me. It's not the day.
Yeah. I've got a story or two.
What 5?
Yeah. My laundry room wall could tell a story. Yeah, so one thing that I just want to point out to those listening is when you sit down and write, it needs to be a judgment-free zone.
Yes.
Don't shame yourself for what you're writing.
That
Because
completely
that's not
defeats the
helpful.
purpose. Yes.
That defeats the purpose. It's not helpful. Observe it and begin to ask yourself why, in a non-judgy kind of a way. Why do I feel this? Where is this coming from? And take it a little bit deeper.
The other thing I would say about that is, in writing, not only in speaking, but in writing as well. If you're writing down something and suddenly you're feeling a pain somewhere in your body, that's something to take notice of. That's not something to fix. Mindfulness seems like this big word that like nobody can put a pin on, but it's literally just paying attention and noticing things, being aware. So if I'm writing about my trauma as a 5-year-old, blah, 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 and my right hip starts to hurt, that's interesting. That's something to pay attention to. And maybe you want to go down that curiosity pathway and be like, oh, well, my right hip is actually attached to my mother wound and blah, 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 whatever. Or just notice it and see when it comes up again.
Yeah.
Because it's not a coincidence. It's not a freak accident, unless you're sitting on a pin or something. It's something that your body is trying to tell you and communicate with you. Yeah. So while writing, journaling, incredibly healing, you're also wanting to pay attention to your body and what your body is saying to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And marrying the two.
Yeah. Because your body is communicating with you all the time. In our society, we've been conditioned to believe that our body is just, it doesn't communicate with us. When in actual fact, your body was created to heal itself and we get in the way. And it is trying to communicate with you because it wants to survive.
Yeah.
It wants to keep living.
It does. It wants, like, my husband is a paramedic and he always talks about how like if you cut yourself, the top of your skin heals first, right? It closes up right away because it wants
to survive.
It wants to survive. But like the layers deep underneath are what heal a little bit slower. So when you've endured some sort of trauma, your initial instinct is, I just need to survive through this. I just need to cover this up so this stops bleeding. But if you don't go back to heal what's underneath, or you just keep putting a Band-Aid over everything and just calling it good, your body's going to start letting you know, hello, I'm still here. I'm still bleeding underneath here. Fix me. It's crying out.
Yeah. And it's going to come out in some way, shape, or form, whether it's how you want it to come out or not.
I mean, sometimes it comes out on my Amazon shopping cart,
Sometimes.
It's like, why did I buy those 5 things that I definitely don't need today? What am I really stressed about? Like I said, there's things that we can do to cope, but even in excess, they can be harmful. Yeah. I can decide that I, want to get on a health kick to get healthier and start running. And like, there's nothing wrong with running. There's something wrong with running 10 miles every day, unless you're training for a marathon. Even that starts to become an unhealthy addiction. You can get addicted to anything.
Yeah.
Anything can be an addiction. And that's just a sign of your body being like, pay attention to me. Pay attention to me, like waving the red flags all over, and if it doesn't come out in addictions, it comes out in health issues. I when I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, I went to a naturopath because every other doctor was like, oh, you're fine, here, take an antidepressant. And the naturopath was like, fibromyalgia is likened to PTSD of the body. And I was like, that tracks. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You said your body perceives everything as a threat,
Mm-hmm.
including food.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So for me, I was not diagnosed with PTSD caused by my childhood until April of this year, April 2023. And do you know what caused me to go seek out a diagnosis? It was
Mm.
not what you think. It was because every time a stressful situation came up in my life, my digestive system shut down and rejected gluten and dairy.
Yep.
And it came to the point where for days I wouldn't be able to eat. And my digestive system was super sensitive.
Yeah.
And then, so it got to the point after a couple of times of this happening, I got curious and was like, why is it that I'm fine sometimes to have a piece of bread and other times I end up sick?
Yeah.
And I found a study that was done many years ago that linked the gut to PTSD.
Yeah.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah. And you were like, how did that happen? Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
So recently I had a stressful situation come up. My stomach got upset and I knew what I needed to do. I needed to care for my nervous system and support my gut.
yep.
And it shortened it significantly. It was a day instead of a week.
I love that. I love that. They're so mixed together. They're so entangled. Like I think of, oh gosh, one of the realizations I had years ago when doing story work was like, I'm talking about this story that happened when I was 19 years old. And for me, in order to survive that, I've taken 19-year-old me, I've put her on the other side of this wall, and I've built a brick wall so that she's separate from me, right? But here's the catch. I still live in that same body.
Mm.
The body that happened to is the body I currently reside in. And while I metaphorically can put her on the other side, when I do that, I neglect myself. I neglect my body. I'm cursing her, who is me. I'm cursing that body, which is this body.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what is affecting my healing and therefore also my health.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's critical for us to make the connection that our physical health and our emotional health and our spiritual health, while our society treats them in isolation, they are not in isolation. And writing your story, journaling, getting the feelings out, and becoming aware of what your body is trying to communicate with you is life-changing.
Yes.
It's
I think
life-changing.
so many people mix up healing, especially in some spiritual communities, with like, you just need to forgive your abuser. And I'm like, no,
It's not that
let's,
simple.
and that's not even on my radar. One,
No.
let's talk about forgiving yourself, like you forgiving
Yeah.
yourself. And two, let's just become more aware of ourselves. Like, let's just get those two things down and then we'll talk about everything else. But like, that's not even on my radar. Like, we won't even talk about that. Let's talk about why you won't let yourself off the hook. Let's talk about how you're feeling in your body. What is your body saying? Like, as we're communicating, as we're reading, as we're going through your story, what's coming up for you? Are you feeling tense? Can you feel yourself bracing? Can you just notice things? I mean, if you can get self-awareness down, like everything else is cake, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I really feel like that's just something that people are missing
Mm.
or glancing over,
Yeah.
and it's hindering their healing.
It's huge. It's a huge piece of the puzzle.
It's like almost the whole pie. No.
Almost. Almost.
But it's also something that's like takes years, right? Like it's not
Yeah, it
like
is a
I'm going to
journey.
be self-aware today. Yeah. I mean, a little bit
I
and a little bit and a little bit each day.
yeah.
And then taking a couple of weeks off and then coming back to it. And
Mm-hmm.
then, you know,
Mm-hmm.
doing the work to get back inside of your body. You know, trauma separates us from our bodies.
Yeah,
We're just fragmented pieces
it
all
does.
over.
Yeah, it does. For a long time, I struggled with the fact that I kept praying for healing, and it felt to me as if my prayer was never answered.
Mm.
But then I had the realization that because my trauma had happened so early in my life and had disconnected me so far from myself, the person who I was created to be, if God supernaturally healed me simultaneously, it would cause more grief than I had already experienced because I don't know that person.
Yeah.
I don't identify with an untraumatized person.
Yeah.
So it can't happen overnight. That's my conclusion. It can't happen overnight because you have to gradually, in very small steps, get to know the part of you that you were separated from in the trauma in
Yeah.
order to survive.
Yeah. It makes me think of something my therapist said. I also did 2.5 years of EMDR, trauma therapy.
Mm,
And I, you know, as we're getting towards the end of it, he was like, you know, how, like, what do you envision for like, do you ever think about like who you would have been had you not gone
mm,
through all of this? And I was like, no,
mm,
because you only know this one thing, right? Like I've been
mm,
this now for 42 years.
mhm,
I don't know anything other than this.
mm.
And while I don't think that healing is a destination that we get to or we land in where we're like, okay, we're done.
All done.
Yeah, exactly. It's a journey. We're walking forever. Um, I do think that getting to the end of something, like you
Mm,
worked through this, doesn't mean you're done. It just means that you've gotten to the end of this for now.
mm,
And then being able to say, if this hadn't happened to me, can I envision who I would have been?
mm.
Then grieve that loss.
Oh,
Because there's one thing I learned years ago when we moved here. It's that we're always looking for the mountaintop experience, right?
mhm,
We're walking to the top of the mountain. We're trudging up the mountain. We're like, we're going to get to the mountain and we're going to meet God face to face. Cool. Okay. Um, but when you get to the top, like God does demand a meeting.
mhm.
And it's not a party.
Nope.
it's not, it's not congratulations.
You
You're
did
so,
it.
yeah, it's we have some things to talk about.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, crap, that is not what I envisioned. You know, it's even if, you know, God did heal like that, I think we would miss out on the opportunity of
Mm,
the journey.
mhm.
It'd be like if Jesus died on the cross and then came back right away, we
Immediately.
miss out. Yes, we miss out on the grieving process, the loss, the mourning, all these things. This is something the Allender Center teaches about healing is this, there's a grief and a loss
Mm-hmm.
to each trauma that you have to go through before
Mm-hmm.
you get to a Sunday morning experience.
Yeah.
It's not, there's something that happens in between. And sometimes that in between is not a nice, neat 2 days.
No. No.
Sometimes it's 20 years.
Yeah. Sometimes it's
Which
years.
sometimes that sounds devastating. But grief also cannot be shortcutted. And I think
No,
grief is very important to the healing journey.
it is. It's
Grieving
so,
like what you could have been,
yeah.
grieving what you lost, grieving grieving your own body.
Mm-hmm.
Like, could my body have been different?
Mm.
Absolutely. And then realizing there's a loss there.
Yeah. Yeah. Grieving the health challenges that you face every day because your stress response was on overdrive.
Yep. Yeah. And how different would your life be? How different would your home life be? How different would
Mm.
your work life be? You know, recently we were on a trip and I was walking around and I was like, this is like just understanding this change me and my husband are about to make in our lives of like, this is a completely different life I never imagined.
Mm-hmm.
This could be, if we decide to take this step, if we decide to do this thing, this is a completely different life I would have ever imagined for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment to feel gratitude of like, wow, like, how do we get here?
Yeah.
And being like, not, pat myself on the back, like, oh, I did a good job, that we can do this or whatever, but just um being like realizing something else,
Mm-hmm.
having those dreams for the future, which I think is something we really lack when we're just in survival mode, just trying to
Yeah.
get through.
Yeah. You can't dream when you're in
You
survival
can't.
mode.
Absolutely not.
You're like, how do I get to the next moment? How do I get to the next hour? How do I get to the next day? How do I get to Friday?
Yeah. How do I get to lunchtime
Yeah.
with everybody still alive?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think at some points, when you're a brand new mom and you have a newborn at home, any parent that has a newborn at home, absolutely. You're just trying to get through the next few hours. That's normal. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But when you make that a lifestyle
Mm.
and your kids are now, 8, 10, 12, and you're still doing that,
That's
your
hard
body
on your health.
has to feel, yes, your body has to feel like, are we done yet? Are we there?
Mm-hmm.
And that can't be a place that you're comfortable in. I think, like 2020, brought us like all these things, right? Hindsight literally is 2020. But being like, okay, we have to slow down. We have to and now look at the damage, right?
Mm.
We can't just like run. We're not running to soccer practices and baseball practices and school and work and blah, 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 blah. But like we have to slow down and now let's look
Mm.
at the disaster that is our lives right now and really
Mm.
assess, is this how we want to keep living? Is this how we want to keep going?
Mm-hmm.
Because it might have worked. It like quote unquote worked, to get you here, but it's not a lifestyle for sure.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of courage to ask that question, and then it takes even more courage to be okay with the answer.
Ah, yes, because there is the truth, there's being faced with the truth, and then there is accepting that truth.
Mm.
And if you
Yeah,
don't do that last part, then you're like, well, I know the truth.
but
I
I'm
don't
going to
want to
keep
acknowledge.
living this other way.
Exactly. Because it's after a while, survival becomes easier.
Yeah.
It's what you're used to. It's what you've done your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
It kept you alive this far.
Yep.
But like, when do you want to start making the shift towards like, oh, I can dream. And
Mm.
then I can also achieve that dream.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what? That just, it's still in my, complex trauma body is still like mind blowing each time. And I have to like stop and be like, just have the gratitude that, wow,
Yeah.
this stuff really works,
Mm-hmm.
like, look at all this work that I've done to work on myself and healing and everything. Wow, this is really like has paid off. Look at
Mm-hmm.
that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think even like little steps that you see along in your healing process, you're like, oh, that makes me want to keep going. Oh,
Mm.
today I didn't lose my mind when my kids screamed their head off because
Mm.
immediately I knew it's not about me.
Mm.
They're screaming because they've got raging hormones. That's not about me. Or
They're
maybe they're
screaming because they
screaming
don't have
at
their
me.
words.
Exactly. My daughter got upset at me. We were at the skate park and she was like, you didn't see me. You're always on your phone. Blah, blah, like just tearing me a new one. And I was like, let's pause right there. One, I was not on my phone. I was on my phone for 5 minutes because I had a work situation I had to deal with. The rest of the time, I've watched you here. So let's talk about what's really going on right now, because this is not that. But being able to be regulated enough to have that conversation and be like, let's pause. I understand you're having a meltdown. You're having all the feelings right now. I get it. But let's talk about what's really underneath that, because
Yeah.
anger is a surface emotion.
Yeah.
Let's talk about why you're actually angry,
Yeah.
you know?
Mm.
But me 6 years ago just would have
Oh.
yelled back at her, you know? I'm bigger, I'm stronger, I can yell louder. I've been doing this longer, So yeah, being in that sort of place is like, oh, all those years of trauma
Yeah.
therapy are really starting to pay off now. And you can grab that, and then that encourages you to like keep going
Yeah.
consistent through the harder times when it is really hard and really disruptive.
Yeah. Wow. So where can our listeners connect with you further if that's what they would like to do?
I'm on all the social medias. My username is Mrs. Wendy J. Olson. I'm on everything. If I'm not, if I'm not, I was, but no, I do TikTok videos, YouTube, all the things. My YouTube is She's Got Gumption. And then if you want to learn more about our nonprofit, if you're a survivor of sexual exploitation, domestic violence, and would like to receive services from us, you can find us at gritplusgumption.org or on social media at gritplusgumption.
Awesome. So I will include links to all of those things that Wendy just mentioned in the blog post that is linked in the description so that you can easily click and be there. And you don't have to search and mom brain and all of these things. So thank you so much, Wendy, for joining me on the show today. I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I look
Same.
forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Mamahood After Trauma podcast. If you resonated with what you heard, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and share it with a friend who would also benefit, because we rise together. Until next time, Mama, keep shining.